Well, good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to the Rancho Mirage Public Library. My name is David Bryant. I'm the library director. And just to give you an idea of the range of programming that we have in this space, yesterday during the day we had a partnership with the Palm Springs Writers Guild, and we had 56 Coachella Valley authors displaying their wares. We had over 300 people in to see them, to take a look at their books, e-books or hard copy, and see if they would buy any. But mostly it was a chance for authors to network, and what better place with readers than in this library. Last night we had an art history lecture on modern art. This morning we had the cops here. Now the cops, for those of you who may not live in town, is the Citizens on Patrol. These are generally retired people who drive around in a white Ford Explorer, and they keep us safe. I mean, I wouldn't want to rely on them in a huge emergency, but they're nice folks, and they're disarmed, but they're disarmingly pleasant to be with as well. So just an idea of what goes on in this room. And now we'll be elevated by a talk on Silver-Gilt. No, this is not about Jewish gilt or Catholic gilt. This is about Silver-Gilt. And we're delighted to continue a partnership which we began courtesy of Janice Lyle, Mary Perry, and our good friends at the Sunnylands, the retreat at Sunnylands, whom we've gotten very close to. And we think of this, and I hope they do as well, as an adjunct to their facility, which you've read about. By the way, April issue of Vanity Fair, if you haven't seen it, marvelous article on Sunnylands. So do take a look for that. We have it out here, and you can go online and find it as well. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Janice Lyle, who is the director of the Sunnylands Visitors Center and Gardens. Janice?
So I am really pleased to welcome all of you this afternoon to what is actually the third of our events that are in partnership with the Rancho Mirage City Library. We did 2 events during February, and we're really happy to launch this event today. It, we hope, is an indication of the growing series that we will plan for next year. I want to be clear about today's program. There were a couple of places where it said it started at 2 and it went 2 to 4. It's actually a PowerPoint presentation that will run for an hour from about 2 to 3-ish, and then Timothy will be willing to answer some questions if you have them from the audience. I would invite all of you to then take time to come to the new Sunnylands Center and Gardens to see the actual exhibition of the Silver-Gilt that Timothy is talking about today. And our public hours are Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from 9 to 4. That's free. You can just drive in. We discovered just don't come on Thursday morning. For some reason, people think Thursday is the day to avoid the crowds. Well, no, we had 474 people before 11 o'clock this morning. So for some reason, people just have this idea, oh, they've been waiting. This week they're coming. And so there they were bright and early on Thursday. But pick another day and come and see our center and its exhibition of Silver-Gilt objects. And I do just want to take this moment to clarify the issue of the difference between the center and gardens and the historic house and grounds. So many of you would like to get a tour of the historic house and grounds. And how many people actually have tried? Okay. How many people have succeeded? Oh, yes. Fabulous. That's really great. For those of you who have tried and haven't succeeded, we offer tickets on the 1st and the 15th of each month. They go on sale online at 9 a.m. Pacific time. You must be at your computer. You must be inside the ticketing system. You must be ready to press the button, because usually about 600 tickets sell in less than 5 minutes. So that's how it's working. That won't always be that way. So, you can look to the future. Someone told me that she hoped that she'd have a chance to come before she died. I think that's possible. So, in any case, it's my real pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Timothy Schroder, who is a freelance lecturer, curator, and consultant. His past employment included time spent at the Silver Department at Christie's in London. He was the curator of decorative arts at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art for many years in the 1980s. He was the curator of the Gilbert collection at Somerset House, and he has been the consulting curator at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. So he comes to us from London. You'll love his accent. He has also served in a number of professional capacities, including chairman of the Silver Society, fellow for the Society of Antiquaries, and the one I love best is he's a member currently of the Court of Worshipful Company of Goldsmiths. Wow. I didn't ask what that really involved in. Maybe you'll share that. He's produced a number of books, many publications, and his current project is Rivals in Magnificence, Goldsmiths' work at the courts of Henry VIII and Francis I. So it is my great pleasure to introduce a specialist in silver, Timothy Schroder.
Thank you, Janice. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. I can't say what a pleasure it is, because, you see, at this time of year, in the UK, us Brits are all just beginning to emerge from what we call SAD, which is one of those crazy acronyms where the acronym comes first and the definition is thought up later, and it's seasonal affective disorder. And I imagine it's not a condition that you'll know much about here. If you want to know about the Worshipful Company of Goldsmiths, I think you probably do. It's probably become the only thing you want to know about. This is one of the ancient trade guilds of the City of London. It goes back to the early Middle Ages, and it's a body of people that exists to support and promote the trade of silver and goldsmiths' work and jewellery in the United Kingdom. The worshipful bit is a rather charming hangover, but in fact it's quite a contemporary organisation, I have to tell you. Now, the subject of my lecture today is one of the most extraordinary phenomena in English decorative arts. An old friend and mentor of mine, the great decorative arts historian John Hayward, used to say that there are only two kinds of silver worth collecting: Renaissance and Regency. And you need to know very little, I think, to feel instinctively why he singled the Regency out for this special rating. You only need to look at something like this tray in the Annenberg collection to feel its strength, its quality, and its presence. So clearly I don't need to show you that these things are extraordinary. That much speaks for itself. But what it might perhaps interest you to hear is something of the artistic and social background to this phenomenon, and to unlock some of its perhaps more mysterious features. Now, I wonder if we could lower the lights in the room. Can we do that? Thank you. Well, first of all, let me explain one very simple thing, because I've given countless lectures in my time where I've glibly mentioned Silver-Gilt, only to be asked at the end of the lecture, what exactly is Silver-Gilt? And since it's one of the remarkable things about this collection that it's all Silver-Gilt, I could do worse than begin by explaining that point to you. Silver-Gilt, in America, it's more often known by the word vermeil. It's exactly the same thing. It's quite simply silver with a very thin deposit of gold on the surface. And you can see that from this slide of the underneath of one of the dishes in the collection, where the gilding has been worn away to expose the silver underneath. Nowadays, gilding is done by electrolysis, in which you immerse the object in a tank and you deposit an even layer of pure gold on the surface by passing an electrical current through it. But before the 19th century, it was done by a different process altogether. Gold was ground to a dust, it was mixed with mercury, and it was painted onto the surface. The object was then placed in the fire, and the mercury was driven off it. But mercury, as you know, is a retentive poison, and it was perfectly well known at the time that this was a dangerous process. An 18th century book on London trades comments that gilding is a very profitable business, but few of the gilders live long. The fumes of the quicksilver affect their nerves and render their lives a burden to them. Well, doesn't sound very nice. But gilding was done to make an altogether richer effect. And the result was a beautiful lemony colour that's really much more subtle than modern electro gilding. So if a few people had to sacrifice the better part of their lives for it, well, it's all for the greater good, I suppose you might say. Most, but not all of the material in the exhibition here at Sunnylands dates from the first decades of the 19th century, and it's in the Regency style. We know it as Regency because it mostly coincides with the time of George III's madness, when his son, later George IV, was made Prince Regent. But the Regency style was part of a wider movement called neoclassicism. And this had been in vogue since the 1760s. And the Annenberg collection actually starts a little earlier even than that, with a real show-stopping object in the style that came before neoclassicism. This bizarre object is called an epergne. It was made in 1761, and it's one of the strangest creations you're ever likely to see. It was made as a table centerpiece to be used at dessert, when its various little containers would be filled with fruit, candies, nuts, and so on. But it's an infinitely adaptable piece, designed so that the dishes and the baskets can be taken off and passed around the table. Not only that, but it was made so that the whole of its Chinese pagoda-like canopy could be taken off to make the piece slightly simpler, if that's what you wished. As for its style, you need to look more closely to see that beyond its Chinese accents, it's really in the Rococo style. And the whole of its base is modelled as a wonderfully airy composition of asymmetrical scrolls and flowers. Even the pagoda, when you look more closely, is not really Chinese at all. It's chased and pierced with the same sort of airy scrolls and foliage as the base. Slightly earlier still than the epergne is another piece in the Rococo style, part of a dressing table service of 1755, and there it is. It's a less outrageous design than the epergne, almost sober in comparison. But you can see very well from these details that one of the key features of the Rococo style is the asymmetrical nature of the decoration. And you can see these asymmetrical cartouches, shields on the cover, and the scrolls and flowers on the panels there. But I say this is part of a service because it would originally have had rather more pieces. The dressing table service, or toilet service, was a 17th century French innovation and was one of the most extravagant forms of plate of its time. This magnificent service, made in Paris in about 1670, which comes from Chatsworth House in England, includes all the usual elements: boxes, bottles, a mirror, candlesticks, a ewer and basin, and so on. And the service evolved around what was known as the levee, in which the ladies' preparation for the day became, in a way, a social event. This scene from Hogarth's Mariage à la mode makes the point pretty well. It shows the bedroom turned into a sort of bazaar. An overweight and probably overpaid castrato is singing on the left, next to a foppish young man in curlers sipping his chocolate. Various other noisy things are going on while the lady of the house is locked in conversation, doubtless about unpaid bills, with her lawyer on the right. But it was called a toilet service, incidentally, because it was, when it wasn't in use, it was covered up by a costly piece of fabric, and you can see it hanging over the mirror there, and that was known as la toile. And so when the cacophony has died down and the people have retreated, the whole table would be covered over by this cloth, which would then be rolled back again when it was next to be used. The coat of arms on the Annenbergs service is that of Sir John Fleming of Brompton Park in Middlesex, which is a county close to London. And he became a baronet in 1763, just a few months before he died. He'd in fact married in 1753 one Jane Coleman, and the engraved arms show his on the left and hers on the right. But his also have a little shield. Can you see it with, let me help you see it, with a hand. This is the badge of a baronet. The baronet is the lowest rank of the nobility, if you will. So the chances are that the arms were engraved at the very end of his life. And perhaps the service was his dying gift to his wife, but perhaps I'm just being romantic there. It may equally be that having become a baronet, he had the coat of arms modified slightly to show his new rank. Well, these Rococo works are in stark contrast to the neoclassical style, which is precise, disciplined, and serious. Unlike the Rococo, these watchwords, unlike the Rococo, whose watchwords were novelty and invention, neoclassicism has its roots in archaeology. Indeed, the very name implies that it was going back to classical sources for its inspiration. And the way in which the style was transmitted to an eager public was through archaeological publications. There were many of these, but one of the most influential in England was Robert Wood's Ruins of Palmyra and Baalbek. Wood travelled to Near Eastern sites that hadn't been much visited before by Westerners, and his publication of what he saw was really genuinely exciting. Apart from anything else, they gave architects and designers a whole new vocabulary of ornament to draw upon. And to see how this affected silver design, we can look at a single object, the Richmond Race Cap. This was commissioned by Thomas Dundas in 1764 from the architect Robert Adam, and it's really quite wonderful. Let me show you a couple of close-up details. It's the complete antithesis of the Rococo. It's contemporary enough, to be sure, with all its references to horse racing and so on, but its main decorative language is all derived from classical architecture. There are flutes, gadroons, acanthus foliage, and so on. And it's all applied with a rigid structural discipline. But things like this were, of course, very expensive, and the top end of the market was entirely driven by commissions from major patrons. To give you just one other example, this magnificent Silver-Gilt punch bowl was also designed by Robert Adam, and it was commissioned by Sir William Watkins Wynne, who was hugely rich and owned so much land in Wales that he was known to his contemporaries as the King of Wales. But now we come a little closer to Sunnylands and to the Annenberg collection, because another of these money-no-object patrons was the famous William Beckford. Here he is. Sorry, no, he isn't. That's the bowl for Watkins Wynne. Here he is. Beckford was the richest commoner in England, and he had a fortune that derived, one's almost embarrassed to say, from huge plantations in Jamaica and an army of slave labour. He never visited his estates, but he certainly reaped the benefits, and he was able, on the proceeds, to form a fabulous art collection and create one of the most extraordinary houses ever built, the Gothic Palace of Fonthill Abbey in Wiltshire. Rather unlike Sunnylands, I think you will agree. Beckford first comes into his own as a patron when he commissioned a range of silver for his forthcoming coming-of-age celebrations in 1781. And here is a small group of them. These are objects in the latest neoclassical style, but more than that, they are of superb quality. Unless you're tempted to think that the teapot at the bottom is a little dull, let me draw your attention to the fact that it's not silver-gilt, but in fact solid gold. These details of the candlesticks give a hint of how really finely finished they are. Well, Beckford was a collector and commissioner of wonderful and unique things all his life. And these two slides of a large engraved sideboard dish and two mounted pieces give a flavour of his exotic and original taste. The dish is about 24 inches in diameter, and it's intricately engraved with a dense pattern of motifs derived, in fact, from his coat of arms. The dish is in the Victoria and Albert Museum, as is this cup, and the other cup is in the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. But these two pieces, one of agate and the other of lapis lazuli, are mounted in silver gilt, and they're designed to evoke the jewel-like quality of the kind of goldsmith's work commissioned by a great Renaissance prince. The basket in the exhibition at Sunnylands may be less exotic than these pieces, but it's no less remarkable. It's one of a pair made for Beckford in 1797 by the goldsmith Paul Storr, and the pair remained together until at least 1937, when they appeared in the sale of the Victor Rothschild collection, and here is the photograph from the catalogue. At that stage, they sat on rather ponderous black bases, which were much later and which have perhaps fortunately since disappeared altogether. The other basket is now in the Gilbert collection in London. Some of you may even remember seeing it from its former existence at the LA County Museum. But Beckford was obsessed with heraldry, as we've seen, and in this case, he was content, rather differently from his usual practice, to let the object speak for itself. And the only mark of ownership is his crest, which is engraved discreetly under the base of the basket. And what an extraordinarily, deceptively inventive object it is. At first sight, it's nothing more than a rather charming and literal evocation of a wicker basket, edged with wheat ears. But when you look again at the way it's constructed, you see something rather different. You see that the stalks of the wheat aren't just randomly arranged, they're not just in parallel. In fact, they cross over each other in a carefully contrived pattern that seems to form, do you see, something that reminds one of Gothic pointed arches, like the tracery in a Gothic window. This is absolutely typical of Beckford's quirky and rather original approach to design. And although the basket bears the mark of the goldsmith Paul Storr, we can be fairly sure that Beckford himself was responsible for its concept. Baskets have in fact been a popular theme with silversmiths for centuries, and this slide gives a hint of quite how varied they could be. We've got two from the 17th century, one from the early 18th, one from the middle 18th century there on the screen. So they could be enormously varied. And they're actually a theme in the Annenberg collection too, because of this beautiful set of 7. Even more than the Beckford basket, these have a naturalism that hardly amounts to a style at all. And you can see from this detail of the tall basket that the silversmith has gone to great lengths perfectly to mimic the disarming, the ordinary rustic nature of natural basket work. And there's something rather disarmingly charming, I think you'll agree, about a grand and costly object being made in the form of one that was cheap and ordinary. For there was nothing ordinary about the original owner of these baskets. Made in 1793 and 1802, they're engraved in the centre with the crown and monogram of Queen Charlotte, wife of George III, and there's her portrait on the right by Gainsborough. But there are 2 other strands to the story of these baskets, hinted at by the initials and coronets, which, like the Beckford basket, are engraved underneath. These, as you can see, are FF, AS, E, M, and S, each with a coronet above them. Now, the last 4 must be for her daughters, Augusta Sophia, Elizabeth, Mary, and Sophia. And there they are. But who the FF was is not entirely clear, unless it's for her second son, Frederick, Duke of York, and his wife, Frederica of Prussia. But that's all rather strange, for it's only a selection of George III's enormous family. If most of the daughters have been included, why not all of them? Charlotte, the Princess Royal, that's the eldest daughter, Amelia, and one other are missing. So why include then also just one son? He was the second son of 7 sons. This is something which I think we can't find the answer to. Maybe it will emerge in the archives of the Royal Collection. It's something for Anne and her colleagues, I think, to work on. There is, moreover, a further set of initials engraved under the basket. You can see it there, and you can see it larger there. EAF and then a small s. This represents a later chapter in their history when Queen Victoria came to the throne in 1837. Ever since the accession of George I in 1715, the thrones of Hanover and Great Britain had been united. But under the Hanoverian constitution, the throne of Hanover had to be passed to a man. So when Victoria succeeded William IV, the throne of Hanover went to the next best claimant, who was in fact her uncle, Ernest Augustus, Duke of Cumberland. And he was the oldest surviving son of George III and the eldest surviving brother of George IV. And Ernest immediately laid claim to the